I guess just first off, obviously you had Cincinnati School Board in Green Township, but what made you want to be a state lawmaker?
Well, there was a unique opportunity in the year 2000 because that was the first year that constitutional term limits kicked in. And about half of the members of the Ohio House found themselves term limited out, including my predecessor, Cheryl Winkler. And so I said, well, this is an opportunity because there'll be half of the legislature will be new. You won't have to sit on a back bench for 10 years before you can ever get anything done. And so therefore, I'll run. And that's really what motivated me to do it. I was obviously the biggest part of my district has always been Green Township. Cheryl Winkler was a trustee in Green Township and went on to be state rep. And then I was a trustee in Green Township and went on to be state rep. So, you know, it was sort of a natural in that regard. And that's how it all came to be. Now, that was a great class of people that came in. We had Husted was in my class, Faber was in my class, Kevin DeWine was in my class, Tom Rega was in my class. There's a whole long list of people that went on to be, you know, big shots. And so it was a very good bunch of people. And of course, Householder was our speaker then to start out with. And that was interesting too because, you know, he was a very good judge of talent. Okay, as long as he was the guy in charge. What I always said is he could pick out who should be the wide receiver, who should be the tight end, who should be the offensive lineman, and as long as he was the head coach and chief quarterback, it was all good. So, you know, right away, he singled me out for my legal career because I've been a lawyer since 1978 in two large law firms, the Taft Law Firm and then more recently the Dinsmore Law Firm. And so with that kind of background, I was sort of a natural to be on the Civil Justice Committee, the Criminal Justice Committee, and in that first 4 years, that's where we got tort reform done. And without getting into the weeds too much, there were 24 different bills we passed, all of which dealt with that general subject. We put in non-economic damage caps, we tightened up the statute of repose, we put in damage caps on punitive damages, on and on and on, one thing after the other. One bill said you can't sue the gun company because the bullet hurt somebody. That was a popular thing back in the day. But anyway, I did that for my first term, and that's really where most of my effort was in my first 4 years. Okay? And then, you know, I've now served under I think 7 different speakers.
Yeah.
Householder, Husted, Ryan Smith, Rosenberger, Cupp, Householder again, and now Stevens. 7. And I've been very fortunate to be in a leadership position under all of them. And majority leader under all but Husted. Under Husted, I ended up being majority whip. Okay, but you know and to me, Jessie, if people say, well, what are you most proud of? I said, well, that's pretty good because as you know from having covered this beat for a while, there was not a whole lot of love lost between several of those speakers. In other words, they weren't necessarily too fond of their predecessor, right? And so the fact that they kept me around all this time was a survivor. I've always used the analogy of Passover, you know, where they put the blood of the lamb above the mantle and the angel of death passed over your house, right? So yeah, so
I guess how have you been able to do that, like work under so many different speakers?
Well, you know, for 2 reasons. I think people recognize that I am pretty good at this and know how to find compromise and know how to craft legislation. And also, I was never angling for their job. Okay? I mean, I never wanted to be speaker. Okay? And everybody always asks me, why not? And I say, well, there's 3 reasons. Number 1, you have to be in charge of all the employees of the House, which consists of about 300 people, most of them right out of college, who are prone to doing stupid things. So you would spend a lot of times on administrative work, number 1. Number 2, you'd have to run around the state incessantly raising money. And while Ohio is a lovely place, and while I was a pretty good fundraiser, it's not that much fun that I want to be driving from Cincinnati to every other location in the state all the time. It's about more than money. And then third, really when you think about it, the speaker does not do much speaking.
Sure.
You know, you sit up there at the
and-
dais and hit the gavel and read the prepared script, and that's fine, and it is a very powerful position, don't get me wrong. But I sort of enjoy speaking to bills on the floor and having debate on the floor. That was sort of a talent of mine, so I was really not a threat to any of these people. If you remember, I was in Ryan Smith's leadership team, and then Householder got elected over Ryan Smith, and I voted for
Smith.
And I voted for Smith. But then Householder kept me around anyway, and he told me afterwards. He said, "Well, you really hurt my feelings when you didn't vote for me after all we've been through." I said, "Larry, now that I'm your majority leader, how would you like it if I went and voted for somebody else?" "Oh, I wouldn't like that at all." I said, "Well, look, that was the box I was in. I was Ryan Smith's majority leader, so I remained loyal to Ryan Smith." But we worked all that out. Rosenberger was great to work with. Kirk Schuring and I became very, very dear friends, and you know he's very, very ill. I was just very, 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 very dangerous. But Kirk and I were both kind of veterans, and Cliff was young and somewhat impulsive, and so you know we had Kirk and I, having been around a while and being much older, were somewhat of a moderating influence, I think. But each speaker had their strengths. I never was fortunate enough to serve under Batchelder, but I got along famously with Batchelder. We were dear, dear friends, and not just because we both have bushy eyebrows. So anyway, go ahead.
Sounds good. Obviously, you're known for floor speeches. What makes a good floor speech, and why is it important to have a good one?
What makes a good floor speech is making sure you understand the bill in all of its technical particulars, but making sure also that you can translate that into something that everybody understands. And it's an extra added bonus if you can throw in some references that are humorous or deal with pop culture, okay, in some way, shape, or form, okay. You know, they always kid me about the debate we had with Mike Skindle one time, and this is when fracking was just becoming a thing, and Skindle was on his high horse bemoaning fracking, and it's environmentally dangerous and blah, blah, blah. And of course, where's the fracking taking place? Eastern Ohio. And so I said, well, look, you might have a point, but Eastern Ohio has been a backwater for a long, long time. And this is their chance to become prosperous again. And then I broke into the Beverly Hillbillies song, okay? Which you know, come and listen to my story about a man named Jed, right? And everybody thought that was funny, okay? Because rather than debate Skindle on every little technical nuance of fracking, I put it in the larger context of an area of our state that had been neglected and was poor as a church mouse. And now, frankly, there's lots of wealthy people over there because of the discovery of natural gas. So a little humor never hurts. I did one time. I commented. Remember Bachman Turner Overdrive? You ain't seen nothing yet. Remember that one? I did that one too. I did the Beatles Taxman at one time. You know.
Yes.
So little things like that to kind of keep it lively, and you don't want to talk forever either. That gives people kind of tune you out when you go on for too long. But you know, I enjoy it. Haven't had to do a lot of it this session because of what we were talking about before the camera started rolling, which is that there hasn't been a whole lot of stuff that was controversial that we passed, and those things that were controversial that we passed, I really didn't care to speak to. You know, all the you know the issues with boys playing girls sports and trans people in the bathroom, and you know, okay, I voted for all that stuff, but I didn't want to make a big floor speech out of that. I figured other people would could speak to that, and I didn't want to. So got along very well with Denise Treehouse, there's several things Denise and I collaborated on. The Good Samaritan Law, where people who are, see their friend in a drug-induced situation, they will be allowed to call law enforcement or the fire department and get help, okay, without fear of themselves being pinched for drug violations, okay? And that was a very good bill that she and I collaborated on. We collaborated on, we collaborated on DORAs. What is a DORA? The outdoor, the
refreshment.
outdoor refreshment areas. And,
Yeah.
and I was in the Senate at the time, she was in the House, and we thought this was a good idea, and we got that done, and we were under pressure to get it done because the All-Star game was going to be in Cincinnati that year. And so the Reds were saying, like, hurry up and get this done, hurry up and get this done. Then the irony is we did get it done, and they didn't do anything with it that year. Now, it is the Dora area now, but between the two stadiums, and, it provides an opportunity for people to enjoy their drinks outdoors and when it's a nice day, and that was a good thing. And then the pièce de résistance of our collaboration was, and this is kind of timely too, there was a elementary school in Addiston, which you just wrote a big article about how poor they are now that the largest employer pulled out. And that elementary school was closed due to environmental contamination coming from that chemical plant. That is part of the Three Rivers School District. On the school facilities list, they were considered a wealthy school district. And the state share that the state would put towards new buildings was like only 10%. So Denise and I said, well, we need to change that. And we wrote a law that said if the school district has to close a school due to environmental contamination, the state will pay 50% of the cost of a new school. And we got that passed, and the people of Three Rivers then matched the 50% with their 50% and built a brand new K-12 school and had the state end up paying for half of it. It was worth about $25 million to Three Rivers. So, that was good. That was a good thing. But I got along very well with her and have collaborated with a lot of Democrats, and I don't see anything wrong with that, even though we're never going to agree on things like abortion and probably not on election law and stuff like that, guns probably, but there's plenty of areas where we can and have collaborated. And a lot of the work I've done in criminal justice, I actually have a sheet that I'll leave with you, and I'll give it to you now. And you can. I just made a list of some of the things I've done over the years, and a lot of it's been in the area of criminal justice, where almost every time I have had a Democrat co-sponsor. Okay, most often an African American co-sponsor. I worked very closely with former Senator Shirley Smith. This session and last session, I worked with LaTanya Humphreys on some things. I worked with Amelia Seitz on an increase in compensation for wrongfully imprisoned prisoners. So you can ask the Innocence Project down there. I've carried their water on numerous occasions. And we equalized the penalty as between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. We did it long before the federal government did, because African Americans tended to use crack and white Americans tended to use powder. And there was really no reason to have the harsher penalties on crack. And so we equalized that. We had a lot of sentencing reform. We've dramatically increased the number of offenses which may be sealed or expunged after the passage of time. And I worked with Senator Eklund on that, with Senator Manning on that. So there's been a lot of stuff in that space where I really think we've made a difference. The DNA bill that we did, that was back in like 2010, where we greatly expanded the use of DNA and who could invoke DNA testing. DNA testing can either prove that you're guilty or prove that you're not guilty. And when we passed that huge law on DNA, it was it was my bill, but Dave Goodman was running for county commissioner or judge or something at the time, so he begged me to have his name be first on the bill. I said, sure, I've never cared about that. But that bill was very good, not only because it greatly expanded the use of DNA, but also because it came up with rules about how long the government has to hold evidence after the case is done. It came up with rules around how the government and the police should conduct lineups and show-ups, because they would do it in a way that oftentimes steered the person towards a particular suspect as opposed to being a very fair form of lineup. So we put rules around that. That was good stuff, So we also changed the law, and I worked on this one with Nikki Antonio when she was over here in the House and then in the Senate, and with Eve Stratton, former Justice Stratton, on saying that if someone was seriously mentally ill at the time they committed the offense, they would not be eligible for the death penalty, and they would instead get life without parole. That took me about 3 General Assemblies to get done, but we finally did. We had to limit the principle only to, I think, about 4 diagnostically correct psychoses, okay? But we got it passed, and I'm for the death penalty in certain very limited circumstances, but this, at least it took it off the table for people that were mentally ill. And I've always cared about, mental illness and about child care and frankly, education funding. All of that stuff has been a big interest of mine, and they're bipartisan in a lot of these ways, right? So,
this is a smaller criminal justice thing, but the red light cameras.
That was a long fight too.
That was a long fight.
And we ultimately won, and managed to stamp them out in most places, not everywhere, because the way we ended up doing it, because the Supreme Court invalidated my first attempt, which was basically to ban them. But the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that under home rule, okay? So we went back to the drawing board, and we said, okay, you can do them to your heart's content, but for every dollar you bill, we're cutting your local government funds dollar for dollar. So we took the profit out of policing for profit. And furthermore, you will also have to prove these cases in municipal court. You cannot just have an administrative hearing where they show the video and say you're guilty, okay? So between those 2 aspects of the new bill, both of which have now been upheld by the Supreme Court, the large cities all quit doing it because they didn't want to lose their LGF. The small little speed trap cities are still doing it. Why? They don't get much LGF. They'll gladly forsake the small share of local government funds that they get in order to reap hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars with their little speed cameras and their little red light cameras. So that was a big fight too.
Did you have a run-in with a red light camera, or how did it come
Well,
to your attention?
I was interested in this issue long before, but yes, here in Columbus, I was turning right on red at a place where right on red is allowed. And they gave me a ticket. And they gave me a ticket because they said you didn't come to a full and complete stop. And I paid the ticket, okay? But I said, what is this? The NFL? This is like false start. You flinched before the snap. I said, this is, nonsense. So, yeah, I was against them before that ticket, and then I was really against them after that ticket because a lot of people were just being a ticky-tack ticket to death is what it was. So, yes, that was so I got rid of that. But also I've had a record of some laws that actually strengthened penalties, okay? One example was under the prior law, when you killed somebody with a gun, you would get what's called a gun spec, a way of extending your sentence. Mm-hmm. But if you killed 2 people or 3 people or 4 people, it would still only be 1 gun spec. So you would actually get a discount if you killed more people. So we changed that to say no discount for multiple deaths, okay? That each one of those would be a separate gun spec, okay? So that was an example of where we went the other direction and tightened and tightened criminal penalties, okay? So, you know, yeah, it's not been all in one way, but it's been mostly favorable to defense, you know, because we far too many people are in prison, okay? We need to find ways to smooth their reentry. And you know that's been a big issue of mine for years with the CQE that we started back in 2011-12, which lets people who are out of prison apply back to the court for a certificate of qualification for employment that they can then take to any willing employer, showing that they've been rehabilitated. And if that employer hires that person, the employer will not be subject to a lawsuit based on negligent hiring, okay? So the quid pro quo was the employer gets some immunity and the ex-offender gets a job. That's a pretty good trade. And then we expanded that this session, working with Rep. Humphreys, to apply that same principle to housing. Because what are the two things that people who just get out of prison most need? A job and housing. If you don't give them a job, if they can't find housing, the odds of them going back to recidivate go up dramatically. And so, you know, I believe very much in second chances, that people are not generally irretrievably evil, okay? And in many circumstances, they can learn the error of their ways and become productive citizens. One of the other things we did in that same vein was the Earned Credit Program, which I'm very proud of. What is Earned Credit? And by the way, that was opposed by the prosecutors. I had to fight the prosecutors on damn near every one of these things, okay?
I was going to say, are they happy to see you hanging it up? Or?
No, I think, look, we respect each other, and I've listened to them on some occasions, but we created the Earned Credit Program. And the Earned Credit Program said, if you actively participate while in prison in job training and education programs offered by the prison system, you can earn time off your sentence. When we first passed it, the maximum you could earn off your sentence was only 8%. And I had to fight like hell with the prosecutors to get that. But the good news is, 10 years later, under Senate Bill 288, that we passed at the end of last session with Senator Manning and I working on it, we increased that to 15%. So again, we're creating incentives for people to get an education or get job training while they're in prison, okay? Going way back to, I think this was 2007 would have been, one of the main things that we had to do was, when you're in prison, you don't get Medicaid. You know that, right? Mm-hmm. Well, when people get out of prison, they have become eligible for Medicaid, but they need their medicine now. So we passed a law, and I worked on this with David Pepper, of all people. He was county commissioner back at the time, and we passed a law that said, look, they will get their Medicaid card on the day they walk out of prison. Mm-hmm. So that we didn't want if they were on some sort of a medicine for either a physical ailment or a mental ailment, more commonly, they need to be able to get that medicine. And they don't have any money. So, you know, that was the first real venture that I got into on that whole thing, and it's good stuff. You know, reentry. Everybody should be for reentry. Everybody should be for specialized courts. Mm-hmm. We've done the drug court in Hamilton County. I've done a number of bills for them. Okay, and drug courts were among the earliest specialty courts. We now have specialty mental health courts, specialty veterans courts. You know,
trafficking and so forth.
Yeah, right. So you know, that's all good stuff. So. You know, that's been a real focus of mine.
Taking it back real quick, Senate Bill 5.
Yes!
An unpopular vote.
Yes. Well, I'm, you know what?
Walk me through that a bit.
Yes. I'm very proud of that vote because I tried to warn my Republican colleagues that they were going way overboard and that this was going to blow up in their face. And I guess they didn't believe me. But I said, and their argument at the time was, well, only 8% of the population is a public employee, a cop, a fireman, a nurse, a teacher. I said, yeah, but damn near every one of those people has a mom, a dad, a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, and you're missing the boat because if we're really taking it to these people, and by the way, everybody kind of loves cops and firemen, right? And nurses. If you're taking it to these people, they're going to be on the warpath. And so the worst part of that bill was the part that said, when labor and management are at odds and have reached their at odds, the way the bill read was, labor would make their last best offer to management, management would make their last best offer to labor, and then management got to choose which offer to take. I said, well, that's called heads I win, tails you lose. That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard of in my life. But that's what they did, and lo and behold, I was among a group of Republican senators and ended up passing by only one vote in the Senate, okay? And they weren't happy with me because Tim Grendell and I were viewed as two of the most conservative members of the Senate. I think they took our yes vote for granted. But both of us were so offended at the basic lack of due process and at the fact that this thing was going to blow up in their face that we tried to say, you're doing this too quickly and you're doing it too dramatically and you'll end up getting nothing. And guess what? The voters rose up and they shot this thing down big time, and there has been no move made since then to revisit any part of this. What's that tell you, right? Mm-hmm. And even Shannon Jones, who was the bill sponsor, she very quickly quit talking about that and then moved on to what she's been very good at in the last 10 or 12, 15 years, which is issues around prenatal care, infant care, child care, early childhood education. So she went to mamas and babies and didn't want to irk the teachers and cops anymore. So, and frankly, you know, I was not a hero to my Republican Senate colleagues. They took away my committee chairmanship, and that was from my roommate, by the way. It's Tom Niehaus, who was president of the Senate. That's not very nice, but it guaranteed me a few things. I have gotten the FOP endorsement every time, I've gotten the fireman's endorsement every time, and I've got the OEA endorsement, the Ohio Education Association endorsement every time. Because, not all of them are Republican leaning groups all the time, right? Particularly OEA, but they've been very generous and very supportive, and it all stems back to that, where you stood with us when we were most directly under attack, and some of these plaques that you see here all deal with that. Here's what the Super 60 Club. We Are Ohio. That was the name of the campaign. Repeal Senate Bill 5. Thank you for voting twice to stop Senate Bill 5. I've got something from the cops somewhere around here, and from the firemen somewhere around here, all about that. It was kind of big time. So it's all good. That was quite an event, Senate Bill 5. And I have one thing I've never done is gone back and watched any of the floor debates. I've never done it, But I remember it was Grendell and I pretty well scorched them, okay? And frankly, and I'm not bragging, but I think we did a better job exposing the flaws in the bill than the Democrats did. They were of course all against it. But anyway, that was something. I worked my way back up into their graces, but I was never in leadership in the Senate over those 8 years. I got to be committee chairman again after serving time in the doghouse. But got
a new condo.
I quit being Tom Niehaus's roommate. So I never. Yes, so that I did. For a while there, Tom Patton and I were roommates, and Patton has been around a long time. And we're dear friends. So, and he's going to serve for longer than me now because he came into the House one term after I did. So I had 2 years seniority on him, but he was just elected to the Senate again, so he was able to bounce back and forth twice. I was only able to bounce back and forth once. I was able to go House, Senate, back to House. And, people said, well, why didn't you run this time? Well, I'm not going to run against Bill Blessing. The Blessing family has been a friend of mine for 45 years. Lou Blessing, Billy's dad, and I were great friends, So anyway, and it's about time to hang it up anyway. After 34 years, continuous service in public office. Continuous service in public office for 34 years. And holding down another job as a lawyer, too. That's a lot to do.
Yeah.
You know what the hardest job I ever had, though, was in elected service?
What?
The school board.
Yeah. How so?
Well, a couple reasons. Everybody thinks they're an expert on their child's education. And the teachers think they know it best, the principals think they know it best, the parents think they know it best, and the school board can never do anything right. Okay? That's number one. Number two, being a conservative Republican on an urban school board is no day at the beach. Okay? We had to change superintendents during my term. We had to work very hard to get out from under a desegregation decree. We had to work very hard with our business community to make some reforms in the way in which they handled the business side of things to make it more efficient. And all of those were tough fights, you know. I mean, so I did that for one term, and I said, well, that's enough. I've done my duty there. So then I ran for Green Township trustee, and that was one of the best jobs that I ever had. We started a program in my very first term as township trustee on tax increment financing, known as TIF. Mm-hmm. And Green Township has had that TIF in place since 1994. And every single capital need for the township since then has been funded by TIF. Parks, fire equipment, police stations, fire stations, the community center called the Nathaniel Green Lodge, all with TIF money. So when I got up here, we rewrote the law on TIF several times, and from 2005 forward, all of the changes you see in Ohio law on that subject was through me, okay? Because, you know, I knew how to do it. Cranley, who was the mayor of Cincinnati, maybe you remember him, he then took what I did in Green Township, put it on steroids, and did it in the city of Cincinnati. I said, what the hell are you doing? He said, I learned everything from you. I said, okay, well, I guess I should be flattered, you know? Mm-hmm. But anyway, if you follow this, like for example, the new convention center that they're building down there, Cincinnati, that's going to involve TIF, okay? But we made some more changes in the law to accommodate our 3CDC business people to get that done. And their little $480 million hotel. Can you believe a hotel costs $480 million to build a hotel?
Seems like a lot to me, but...
Well, now they never stop down there, because now they're talking about replacing the Heritage Bank Arena with another arena that they said is going to cost between $670 million and $800 million. And I'm like, wow, where's that going to come from, you know? And I'm kind of glad that I won't be in the legislature, because you mark my words, the Bengals will come knocking at the door here in a year or two.
I assume the Browns.
And the Browns too. Mm-hmm. That's going to be tough, because, you know, the state does not have limitless pots of money either. I happen to believe, though, that I support state funding for things like that, because why should it be Hamilton County taxpayers alone that pay for this stuff when people are coming from Warren County and Butler County and Claremont County and, you know, as far away as Pickaway County or farther to come to Bengals games? Mm-hmm. Having the state pay does tend to spread that burden across more people and avoid having it fall exclusively on Hamilton County residents, because, you know, we don't have an inexhaustible source of money down there either. So, but I won't be here for that fight. Probably a good thing, right?
This is a massive topic, so I don't know how to get into it, but you've done a lot of work on energy policy.
Yes.
Obviously, House Bill 6 passed through
Yes.
the legislature, and
Yes.
there was a lot of, you know, federal drama related.
Well,
to that
there
as
was
well.
a lot of drama over that, but I have maintained, Jessie, that it was a very solid piece of policy, because it did a lot more than provide a $1 billion bailout to the 2 nuclear plants. Did a lot more than that. We created the first ever fund to build 4 or 5 utility scale solar arrays. That was part of House Bill 6. Mm-hmm. We created in that bill more programs and more money to help low income customers get their homes weatherized and made more energy efficient. We kept the coal plants open, which a lot of people don't like, but I'll get to that point in a minute. We did an amendment in that bill for industrial wind so that companies could build wind turbines on property adjacent to their factory and use that wind to power their factory. And that I had to fight that with AEP and a company called One Energy out of Northwest Ohio. That was a long fight, but we got that in the bill. There were provisions of the bill that helped to subsidize county fairs, because the county fair, which as you know might operate for 1 week, had to pay for 52 weeks on their electric bill, and so we took that burden away from them and subsidized that. So and we got rid of the energy efficiency mandates and capped off the renewable power mandates. We did all that in the bill. And LSC said, never been controverted, LSC, who as you know is the ultimate arbiter of what bills costs and what bills fiscal impact is, they came back and said, this bill over its life will save ratepayers $2.3 billion. $2.3 billion, even after the $1 billion subsidy to First Energy for the nuclear plants, okay? So that part of the story was hardly ever told, okay? But it's true, and when we canceled the nuclear subsidy after the householder thing blew up, okay, LSC came back and said, now that bill is going to save over $3 billion over its life because we wiped away the $1 billion subsidy that, by the way, was never paid. Not one farthing of that was ever paid to First Energy. That's something else most people don't know, okay? So I had nothing to do with all of the alleged skullduggery that involved First Energy and Larry Householder, and nobody ever. In fact, to this day, nobody from the government has ever called me, interviewed me, talked to me, subpoenaed me at all, okay? But I was right there in the middle of House Bill 6, working very hard to make sure it passed. I gave a speech about that on the floor, as of what I recall, okay? But I wasn't part of any of that alleged chicanery, and I don't condone it. If in fact there was a quid pro quo, if that's true, well, that's not right, but I had nothing to do with that. We face, the reason I'm talking about coal and nuclear, in December 2022, Winter Storm Elliott hit Ohio. And the gas lines that fed the gas-powered power plants froze up. And if we did not have the 2 nuke plants and the coal plants, there would have been brownouts and or blackouts hitting Ohio 2 days before Christmas. So my point was, we need a diverse source of fuel with which to make electricity. They all have a role to play. You do not put all your eggs in one basket. And that's what the gas people wanted us to do. They wanted to run coal out of town, run nuke out of town, and then they would be king, right? And frankly, the renewables people like that program too, because gas is the best backup for wind and solar. When the wind does not blow, when the sun does not shine, their wind and solar don't work. And then you have to fall back on a traditional thermal baseload power plant. And the one that is easiest to ramp up and down is gas. There's no question about that. And gas is generally the cheapest form with which to make electricity. That's generally true, but not always. When we passed House Bill 6, gas was going for $2 to $3 per MCF, which is a unit of measurement. And that was far and away the cheapest form of fuel with which to make electricity. Coal was out of the money, nuke was out of the money, okay? 2 years later, right about the time the Ukraine war started, no, that was maybe more than two years later, the price of gas spiked to $9 per MCF. And at that point in time, all of a sudden, nuke was back in the money, and coal was back in the money too. So that illustrates the importance of having a diverse array of fuels with which to with which to make electricity, and we're running out of electricity. I don't know if you've heard my speeches on this lately, but I've been giving it all over the place. You've got demand going like this because of AI, requires huge amounts of electricity, crypto mining, huge amounts of electricity, data center, huge amount of electricity, and electric vehicles, a great new source of more electricity. Demand here. Supply is here, going down. Why? Because nobody is building new thermal baseload power generation because of environmental rules, because the federal government has made it very hard to get permits, particularly under Biden, because there's all these restrictions on coal now that have essentially shackled them so they can't hardly even operate under the environmental rules. And so what happens when demand is here and supply is here? Well, originally, the environmentalists said, don't worry, we'll have wind and solar to make up that delta, right? Mm-hmm. Well, didn't happen either because, they have not solved the problem of intermittency that you have with wind and solar. When they come up with a good economical way of storing the energy produced when the sun does shine and the wind does blow, then we got something to talk about. But we don't have that now. And so we have got to do something about this huge imbalance between demand and supply. So what happened? You saw that Representative Sweeney and I introduced a bill, and before that, in the previous General Assembly, it was Representative Leland and I to bring back energy efficiency programs in a new and improved form. It's called House Bill 79. We managed finally to get it through the House, okay, and I gave testimony on it this week over in the Senate. That will help tamp down the demand curve, right? And then ultimately we've got to do something to bring up the supply curve so that supply and demand fall in a greater degree of equilibrium, because when demand is high and supply is low, there's only two things that can happen, and neither one of them is good. Mm-hmm. Prices go through the roof, right? Or the available quantity of the product is rationed, which translates to brownouts and blackouts, which they've had in many other parts of the country already. We've been fortunate not to have too many of them in Ohio, but it's coming. PJM tells us that they will have zero reserve margin in their 13-state electric grid by the year 2028. Zero reserve margin. That means no room for error, okay? And it takes 4 to 7 years to build a new combined cycle gas plant. Well, today is the end of 2024, and even if they started building tomorrow, we wouldn't have it done by 2028. So this is going to be a crisis, and I've been like Cassandra trying to tell all my colleagues, this is coming, let's do something, and I can't seem to get their attention because it's, I don't know why, but Chairman Stein and I have been screaming bloody hell about this for some time, and I'm glad I'm not going to be in the General Assembly when the fit hits the shan, because Bob and Betty Buckeye will be on a warpath when there's brownouts and blackouts, or when the price of electricity goes through the roof. California, for example, there are parts of California, San Francisco, for example, where the per kilowatt price of electricity right now is 3 times higher than it is in Ohio, okay? And one of my friends from Ohio has a daughter living in San Francisco. And my friend was complaining to her San Francisco daughter that my friend's electric bill for the month of August was like $281. And her daughter out in San Francisco said, we would dance in the streets if our bill was that low for electricity. So, it's coming, folks. It's coming. And that's my one great regret, that I won't be here to help guide us through this coming crisis. It's going to be a crisis. So anyway, yeah.
Have you noticed like any change in the willingness to tackle these kind of big substantive issues versus?
Well, how do I say this? Put a positive spin on it. The big substantive issues are what we should be mostly about. But that requires a lot of study. It requires a lot of compromise. It requires a lot of research. It requires a lot of digging and a lot of interested party meetings, okay? There doesn't seem to be as much of an appetite to do that on the part of many of my colleagues as there once was, okay? And they have sort of gravitated towards more easily grasped issues of arguably less substantive importance, right? You know, should all flags, or should all American flags sold in Ohio be American made? Okay, good. Should, you know, boys be in the girls' bathroom? Well, probably not, but okay, what are we talking about? You know, 30 people? You know, should boys be playing girls' sports? Well, probably not. But again, is that really a thing, right? And you know, I think we're going to have to, hopefully, we've got to get people in this business for the right reasons. And with term limits, you find that people are on a much accelerated, ambitious scale, okay? Mm-hmm. They're not really here to do those substantive things. They're here to make a name for themselves, get their name in your wonderful newspaper, right? And on TV, and then position themselves to go to Congress or to have a statewide office or something like that, okay? Mm-hmm. And, you know, more power to them. But yes, there's crises all over this state. Childcare. We are doing a really crappy job in funding childcare. And Andrea White, my dear friend, she's working her butt off trying to get something done, and she's 100% right. It's a workforce issue, because if mom can't find childcare, mom's not going to be in the workforce, or dad. And secondly, it's an education issue. If we are not doing a better job of pre-K education, because not all kids have the same starting point in kindergarten. Many kids in underprivileged areas, you know, they come to kindergarten at age 5 with very limited skills of differentiating colors and all of that, the stuff that more privileged kids do by age 2, you know? So we've got to invest in that. It's an education priority, it's a workforce priority. But we have not done a very good job of doing that. That's a substantive issue that I think needs attention. There's more to do on the criminal justice front. I can tell you that. The energy front is huge, as we've been discussing. The good news is, on school funding, as you know, we finally passed the Cupp-Patterson Fair School Funding Formula. Mm-hmm. We did that 5 years ago. It was to be funded over 3 biennia. We funded the first, we funded the second. And now it will fall to my successors to fund the third. But if you recall at the time, everyone agreed that this new school funding formula was constitutional. That the teachers' unions agreed, the school principals league agreed, the superintendents league agreed, everybody agreed. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very important that we follow through with the third tranche of that funding and put that issue to bed, because it's been kicked around for 30 years probably, okay? That's a big issue. And now that we have universal school vouchers, okay, now the people that want to send their kids to a private parochial school will find it easier to do if that's what they want to do. So I believe in education for all children. If you want the public option, it should be well funded. If you want to send your kid to a religious or private school, that should be your choice too. And if we can help defray that cost, we should. And that's kind of what happened in this last budget. The Senate wanted universal school vouchers in the worst way. The House stood by its guns and said, well, okay, but you have to fully fund the second tranche of Cupp-Patterson. And that's what we did. So that's good. And I hope that continues, you know. I mean, it doesn't have to be you're either a school choice person or a public school person. You can be both if they're both adequately funded. And I believe in that. So anyway.
One quick one on criminal justice. You worked with Jessica Miranda on Scouts Law,
yeah,
Boy Scouts.
Oh yeah.
I guess why was that important? And then you've also been kind of opposed to opening up
Well, yeah,
lawsuits
sure.
in regards to sexual abuse. Which
Right.
you've gotten some
I was
criticism
happy
for.
to work with Jessica and get that bill done this session.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I supported that bill is the Boy Scouts had entered into a settlement, and the settlement paid greater amounts of money to victims who lived in states with longer statutes of limitation than they paid to victims who lived in states with shorter statutes of limitation. So this was a settlement. It was an agreed settlement in bankruptcy, okay? And that being the case, and the Boy Scouts willingly agreed to it, we passed a law that said when a charitable institution goes through a bankruptcy and enters into a settlement of this nature, there is no statute of limitations. And that facilitated the Ohio victims to be treated on the same playing field as those victims in other states that had abolished their statute of limitations. So we found a way to thread that needle. Good. But to say we should eliminate statutes of limitations more broadly, as the folks at Ohio State want to do, or as the survivors of victims of priests want to do, is unfair. And it's unfair because with the passage of time, memories fade. With the passage of time, witnesses die, become incapacitated, get in the nursing home with Alzheimer's, and it's just a matter of fairness that these things be investigated and prosecuted and remediated while it's fresh in everybody's mind. And to eliminate the statute of limitations is to create an unfair playing field where the jury is obviously going to be sympathetic to the stories that are being told by the victims and say, well, okay, let's tag them for a big amount of money. I get that, but it's not fair. And the Catholic Church, and I'm not Catholic, I'm a Presbyterian, but the Catholic Church, for all of its sins in this area, still has done an awful lot of good. And I don't want to put them into bankruptcy. But those states where have passed the elimination of the statute of limitations, there's all kinds of dioceses around the country that have gone into bankruptcy. And I don't think that's a good thing. So, yes, I've held the line very tightly against a total wholesale elimination of the statute of limitations. We did significantly increase the statute of limitations on criminal charges of rape. I supported that, right? You now have 25 years within which to complain of having been raped. And that's 25 years from the time you turn 18, by the way. And that time can be extended by 5 more years if there's DNA evidence that comes to light that shows that it happened. Okay, so I supported that, right? Nobody's for rape, right? But, actions for damages tend mostly to enrich the lawyers that bring the cases. And, I just think we need to have a reasonable statute of limitations on these civil actions for damages to encourage people to come forward at the time so we can get on this when it's still fresh and provide them with the relief that they deserve. But to let people come in at age 50 or 55 and realize that my life is a mess and it must be because Father McCarthy did XYZ to me when I was 16 years old, I don't know, How do you know that's true? Can you remember what you did 35 years ago or 50 years ago? You're probably not even 35, but
I am 35, but not 50.
Well, there you go. So I don't think many of us can remember accurately all of the details of what we did a long time ago. And that's why we have statutes of limitation, particularly on actions for money damages. So.
I remember when I first got here, you were a frequent smoke break taker with Eklund and other colleagues.
Yes, I was.
I hear that you are
I quit. Well, I quit. I haven't had a cigarette since August 2, 2023. I was diagnosed with kidney cancer last summer and had my left kidney removed, and so yes, and so the day I went in for the surgery, I had my last cigarette in the parking lot of the hospital and quit, and I've managed to stay off it to this day. So that's hard to do, but nothing like a medical emergency to to provide an incentive to do it. See what I mean? So, yeah. And, I've always said if people want to smoke, they should be allowed to smoke. I really do believe that. I'm pretty much of a libertarian when it comes to stuff like that, and marijuana. I mean, it's not a big deal to me, right? So, yeah. Anyway, but I don't smoke anymore. I don't even try those little things you put in your mouth, like Jay Edwards likes to use. They're called Zyn or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
He's always wanting me to try one. I said, I don't need to anymore. I'm off nicotine, so not off caffeine though, but not on nicotine.
Oh goodness. What are you up to next?
I don't know. I mean, as you know, I'm still a practicing lawyer at the Dinsmore Law Firm, and I know I'm obligated to them for at least the next year because I've got some important litigation that I'm handling, and there's a limit, Jessie, to what a sitting member of the General Assembly can do by way of lining up some state-related gig while he's in office. There's an ethical issue there, okay? So you don't need to lock that down. You really shouldn't lock that down while you're still in office, because let's say I was to take a job with a lobbying firm, okay, which I can do after I'm done, okay? But let's say then in lame duck we're voting on some bill that lobbying firm wants passed, and I vote yes. People would say, well, you only did that because you're going to get a job from it, you see? So, I wouldn't mind serving on a state board or commission. That's what a lot of former legislators do. That means you don't have to be here every week. It's not as full-time of a job as this is. And I think I could do a good job on any number of the state boards and commissions that exist. I've made some preliminary inquiries of Christine Morrison and Giles Allen, and we'll see where that leads when I'm done. But, I don't have to make that decision today, and I really shouldn't. So I do, part of me says you're 70 years old, give it up and spend time with your 7 grandchildren and go fishing and play golf, work in the garden, go fishing and play golf. But then everybody else says, well, 70 is the new 60, and you can do a lot of things in your 70s. Look at DeWine. He's in his upper 70s, I think, and he's been very active, right? Look at Trump, for God's sake, But I won't get into Trump.
Oh, now I want to ask about it.
Well, no, he won. I'm glad he won, but he's an interesting character. Yes, So it's my model is like Reagan. I cannot really see Ronald Reagan driving a garbage truck or flipping French fries at McDonald's. Okay, but Trump is a showman, and he now realizes what's the old saying? Bread and circuses. That's what the citizenry wants: bread and circuses. So he was trying to relate to people at that level, and not following in the mold of being very real presidential in the former mold, and it worked. Obviously, the amazing thing about Trump is, and this is an amazing statistic, among people making more than $100,000 a year, Kamala Harris won. Among people making $50,000 to $100,000 a year, Trump won handily. But most amazing of all, people making $50,000 or less a year also went for Trump. That's crazy. So what it tells me is, for whatever you want to say about Trump, and I'm not going to say, but for whatever people want to say, he at least, he is related to people on a level that most Republicans have never been able to relate to people on. Pretty amazing, really. Now it will fall to him and his friends and minions and cabinet members to come through with all this stuff, right? And his first time around, he made a lot of promises too. But
yeah,
I don't remember Mexico paying for that wall.
I don't either, but we shall see.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because they talk about people being like workhorses, not show horses, or show horses, not workhorses.
Yes.
I think you've done a great job of being a workhorse, but also with some showmanship attached.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's actually helped me get the work done. You know, you don't want to come across as being a know-it-all, arrogant person. You want to have a little bit of flair, and that kind of woos people over. And you know, Trump is pretty good at that, I guess. I mean, the master of the bombastic statement, but you know, let's hope he can deliver on the workhorse side of the equation, right? I don't think you will find mass deportation of 10 million people. I don't think that's going to happen. There will be a renewed emphasis on securing the border and deporting people with criminal records. That will happen probably. The tax cuts that he passed the first time around will probably be continued. Okay, I don't think he will succeed in funding government with tariffs. Okay, most economists will tell you that tariffs are not necessarily the way to go, because it is not really true that the foreign country pays the tariff. They pay it, and then it funnels down to the goods being exported from that country and ultimately paid by the consumers that consume the products. So, you know, I would not, many of us are more in the free trade mold of the traditional Republican Party, and somewhat dubious about going to a system that is more heavily tariff oriented, okay? I mean, we had that.
Stivers was talking about that too.
Well, yes, and Stivers is a dear friend. You know, when we did tort reform in that first 4 years, I worked very, very closely with Steve Stivers. Senate Bill 80, which was the master tort reform bill, one of 24, but the big one. And Steve and I worked together on that, and he's always been a good friend. I've worked together with Troy Balderson on many of these energy issues, and he's always been a good friend. So, you know, yeah, you have to have allies. Kirk Schuring, he's been my friend, and we've worked on sports betting, for example. That's one that I was deeply into, right? And fireworks, that's another issue. You know, for years and years and years, you could buy fireworks in Ohio, but you had to swear that you wouldn't shoot them off in Ohio, which is kind of bullshit. So, if you look over there immediately to your right, see that picture of that horse?
Yeah.
The guy that owns Phantom Fireworks, okay, also had a Kentucky Derby winner. And so when we finally got the fireworks thing passed, he gave me a photo of his winning horse, okay? So
champion in life.
there you go. So that was kind of funny, right?
Yeah.
So my minister at the time, a Presbyterian minister, gave me that photo of an elephant. She was on a safari in Kenya, I think, Kenya or Tanzania, and brought that back. So it's quite a collection of stuff you collect, and that's going to be one of the somehow between Christmas and New Year's, we're going to have to box all this stuff up and take it somewhere, you know? So
yeah, you have quite the collection.
Quite a collection. Well, yes. All right, so we're good?
Yeah, I think I'm good. I could have kept going for another hour, but I have to cut it off at a certain point.
No, if you have follow-up questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. And
Okay.
you know,
Sounds
I've
good.
always been, you know me well enough to know that I generally always will respond to the press when they call and ask me something. But you have not seen a whole lot of press releases coming from me, right? Because that's the... When you live by the press release, you die by the press release.
That is true.
So I don't do that. You know, you have a question, I'll try to answer your question if I'm able to do it. But all this self-promotion that a lot of people do with their press release, I've never gone in for that stuff, you know?
Yeah. It's been really interesting because I started covering it in 2015, so not that long ago, but long enough to see a little bit of change in the chamber.
Yeah. Well, yes, it has changed to some great extent, actually.